Good afternoon and welcome to our April broadcast for our monthly Ask iToo questions. Happy to have you all here. We've got about 10 questions that were actually all sent in probably last week, these ones, so they're all quite fresh and current, and hopefully I'll answer some of the things that you've sent to us. As always, I'm joined by Jaime, who's on chat only. I don't know if you want to say hello, Jaime.
Hi everyone, welcome to our third Q&A.
Yeah,
Excellent
third.
to have everyone here. So
Third one this year, fourth in total. So going to start with the biggest question that we've been asked over the last week, in fact over the last few weeks, which of course, as you can probably guess, is when will Forest Pack and RailClone be available for 3ds Max 2023? And notice I've deliberately missed the 3 off the 3ds Max there. Oops, no, that wasn't deliberate. But so the good news is that this is available now, but it's in beta only. So we have beta versions of Forest Pack and RailClone available to download from your user panel, which you can get now, and they're all ready to go. So there are a couple of bugs that we're ironing out because we've changed to the new plugin installation method that Autodesk are recommending, and it's meant some big changes on our side. So there are a couple of little bits and bobs that we're just ironing out, which will mean the stable versions probably won't be available for another week or two.
I would say 2 weeks, Paul.
2 weeks, do you reckon?
Yeah.
Let's say 2 weeks then.
Yep.
Okay. This, of course, also adds compatibility to the latest versions of Arnold as well. And as always with all our releases, we generally use any release as an excuse to add a couple of things. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of those new additions that are in the beta version now. Nothing major, but a couple of small improvements that I think will help people with their workflow. So the first one of those is a request to have better reference filtering options in Forest Pack. So I don't know if you remember this, but in the last Forest Pack version, we had the ability to basically place objects on references by using their name. Okay, so filtering by their name, and I'm just going to give you a quick demo of that. But just to show you what I've got in this scene, I've used these markers as text, but actually the text that I'm using in here is irrelevant. It's the name up here that's important. This is just so you can see in the viewports a little bit clearly what I'm actually referencing. Okay, so these markers in the viewport display could actually be anything. They don't have to be text. In order to target these markers, what you would do is go into the Forest Pack object, and then you'd go to the distribution rollout and change the distribution mode to reference mode. And then what we can do is click on this button here to add a bunch of markers. Now I've only got a few here, but you could of course have hundreds or thousands. So I'll add all of those. Okay, and you can see what that's done is it's placed a little sphere on each one of those markers, and I've deliberately moved the pivot point up so we can see clearly which marker is being targeted. Now, I've done a tutorial on this, so if you've seen this, sorry, it's a little bit of repetition now, but one of the things about when you use markers is that if a marker name isn't matched by a name in the geometry rollout, and that's the name of the actual sphere, then it will use just the first object in the geometry list, which at the moment is the sphere anyway, so it's always going to be there. So what I want to do is to add a blank object to the start of the geometry list. That way, if a marker isn't positively identified, it won't display geometry. So I'll just put that up there, and I'll just call it undefined. Undefined, like that. Now let's go back to distribution. Right, so how do I turn this match geometry name by marker on? Well, first of all, you want to turn on this checkbox here, match geometry by name, and then underneath that there's a new option which allows you to use regular expressions, regex, to match these objects. And what that allows you to do is to use things like wildcards, booleans, and that kind of thing to identify if something's on here. So how do you do that? There's no way of putting the search term here. Well, you do that by going to the geometry list and actually changing the name of the objects that you want to target these with. So, for example, if I only wanted to put this name on the oaks, then how would I do that? Oaks are here in the middle. I can't just type oak because it's got tree in front of it, tree hyphen, and so on and so forth. So I need to somehow put a wildcard in before that. And a wildcard in regular expressions is a full stop. So a full stop. And a full stop will give me a single character, a wildcard for a single character. So if you want multiple wildcard characters, then you put a full stop and an asterisk. And then that will target everything. But what it's basically saying is, at the beginning, start with a full stop and asterisk, see until you hit the next search. And now what I want to look for now is oak. So I'll type oak and hit return. That's worked only on this one because I've got a wildcard asterisk, which is basically ruled out tree, and then I've got oak afterwards. But all these other ones have got something afterwards, 001, 002, whatever. So I need to put another full stop asterisk after that. And then you can see that I've got all 4 of those. But I can do this in a very filtered sort of way, using these kind of booleans, which is very cool. This is an advanced technique, I should point out. This is if you've got some, markers sent to you by architects with all kinds of different naming conventions and that sort of thing. What about if we wanted to just get the tree maple with a hyphen? So in that case, we could type tree like that, and then a hyphen, tree, then a hyphen, star, and then a dot, and then a star. Okay, well that's kind of worked, except I've got oak and pine as well. So actually I want dot star, I want, hyphen, and then maple. And then dot star. Right. So now you can see that I've got tree at the beginning, I've matched that, I've got a hyphen, I've matched that, and maple, and I've matched that, and then afterwards I've just got the wildcard, which is working. The only problem here is, of course, that this last one didn't match because I've got a double hyphen. There's been I've imagined that there's a mistake in there, so that hasn't worked. So what you might have to do then is add another boolean, for example, another star there, and then that could work. Because that's basically saying that star is whatever letter precedes this is 0 or as many times as you like. If that appears in that string, then it will register as true. But obviously, what if we wanted to exclude this one? Well, then we could use a different wildcard, a different sort of operator, which we could be plus. And what plus does is doesn't say 0 or more. It's basically 1 or more. Has to appear 1 or more times. So there's all these expressions. I'm not going to go through them now, but if you look up regular expressions online on Wikipedia, there are all these kind of handy little expressions you can use to search through strings that makes this incredibly powerful way of looking through your markers. The old system is also in place, so if you don't want to get as complicated as this, you can use that, but this is for real for power users that use a lot of markers that really wanted to filter down and be able to accurately target just the markers they want. There's lots of handy tools here. I'll publish a more thorough tutorial about this once the stable version is released, but I thought it might be something you wanted to have a look at. Great. Also in this version is a few changes to Lister. So if we open up RailClone Lister, actually there's not a RailClone object in scene. Let's open up Forest Pack Lister. Then what we've got in here as an extra, if we go to settings, is this stats. Weirdly not showing up. Well, we've got it. You can see it, but it's not showing in the listings. But there's a build time basically option here. You see it here. It says 1 millisecond. So this is basically giving you at a glance. It's giving you at a glance how long. See it in the RailClone one actually. Build time. How long that forest pack object is taking to be built. And 1 millisecond. I mean, it's absolutely negligible, isn't it? But this just gives you an easy way of seeing the kind of impact of your forest pack or RailClone objects on scene or file operations and when you launch a render, because that's typically when a build will happen, as well as obviously when you're working on the object itself. So this has been added to forest pack and RailClone Lister as a handy little at a glance reference there. So kind of on that subject of build times, another thing that we added in the most recent RailClones was this proxy cache thing, which, and you've seen this video, on the left hand side we've got proxy cache enabled, and you can see that this very complex scene opened in 13 seconds, and on the right hand side we've got proxy cache disabled, and the same scene, exact same scene, opened in 1 minute and 7 seconds, which is a huge difference obviously, and that is just to do with the fact that it baked in all of the calculation into the scene file or into an external file, and that meant that there was no kind of calculation time involved when you opened this scene or when you fired off a render. So it makes sense then that the first question people asked was, well, I like that new proxy cache feature in RailClone, but could you please add that to Forest Pack? And the answer is, well, we don't really need to, thankfully. So what we've got instead is an alternative way of doing things. And I'm just going to load a file to show you where I have deliberately kind of slowed Forest Pack down to show you how you can improve build times. So let me just open this file up. So I'm just opening a file here. It's just going to take a few seconds because it's obviously got a slow build time, deliberately so. So what I've got in this scene are just loads and loads of billboard people, and I've done everything I can to slow it down. And actually that's not an easy feat with Forest Pack because it's actually very efficient. So getting a long build time in Forest Pack I found quite challenging. But I've basically turned on everything I know to slow it down. So things like collisions, I've got I've got one Forest Pack excluding another in here, and I've got objects excluding objects in here, and I've turned up all of the sensitivity on those, so the map builds that happen behind the scene, to try and slow this down. And hopefully, if I open Lister now and refresh it, we can see that this Forest Pack object here, which is this first one, takes about 7 seconds to build. Now that doesn't sound like long, but in Forest Pack terms that's a really long, slow build. So let's see what we can do to improve that, and how we can use a kind of version of proxy cache in Forest Pack that already exists and has always existed, but many people aren't aware of the advantages of doing this. So what you would do basically to enable proxy cache in Forest Pack is go to the items editor and just switch it to custom edit mode. Basically this has the effect of baking in the build directly into Forest Pack, and there's no longer a kind of a slow build time anymore. And you can see that went from 7 seconds now up there to 58 milliseconds, which is a huge improvement in build time. So if you've got, for some reason, lots of slow Forest Pack objects like this that maybe take 7 or 8 seconds to build like mine does, or maybe longer, just switching in items editor mode to custom edit can dramatically improve your file like saving and loading times. Loading really. Anything that triggers a rebuild really. Same with rendering and that kind of thing. So that's a really quick tip, but I think it's a really handy one, and hopefully that will help you with that question. Jaime, are there any questions so far?
Nope. Nope at all. Nope.
Nothing at all. Well, that's good then. Okay, so this is actually a question from that was asked for the previous one, but we never actually managed to answer it, which was that how do you create a lily pad and lotus flower preset? So let me just open this up here, and this is to do really with using the clustering feature, I would say, and probabilities. So what we want to do is to create little clumps of lily pads and add a few lotus flowers to it, and it also does use collisions too. So let me switch over to screen capture mode, and you can see here kind of what we're going for. So I'll just show you briefly the end result here, which is little clusters here of lily pads, and I'm just going to come into the settings and I'll give you a quick preview before we do it from scratch. So first of all, in areas,
Paul, I'm afraid your screen froze. What I'm seeing here is the introduction. Okay, now I get it.
Yeah, seems to be streaming okay as far as I can see. Is still a problem, Jaime?
Oh.
No, it's okay. Okay. Okay, rather than go through this, let's go through this from the start. I think it's more easy to explain. So I'm going to open this file up. This is the start one. And then try and recreate this effect here. Okay, so here we go. Here is how this would look if we just scattered it with no kind of clustering or anything like that parameters. And as you can see, it's just done what you'd imagine and filled this area rather nicely. So first thing I might do is to change the patches or change the distribution, okay, to maybe something like patches like this, and we can maybe control this a little bit, change the density and so forth. So this will give us our first level of kind of randomization. And then though, maybe we'll use clusters too. So cluster features basically let you group together items in the geometry list. And if I come down here, I can set this to clusters, and you can change the size. That's working well. Aha. So the reason I'm not seeing anything there is because in my geometry list, see, I've got 3 objects and they've all got the same color. Now what clusters does is it groups objects together based on this color ID, which is red at the moment. Because they've all got the same color ID, there's basically no clusters. If I was to change one of them to a different color, now you can see I'm starting to get clusters. Over here, for example, you can see here's a cluster, here's a cluster. But I don't want to do that. I want to keep the same color ID for all of these parts that are going to make up the plant. And what I want to do instead is to add a new item of geometry and set it to disabled, so it's basically null, and give that a separate color, which it has got purple. What that lets me do is basically create empty clusters. So when I scale this down a little bit, you can see I'm creating empty, here's one here, empty clusters there. And this is perhaps more obvious if I change the distribution mode back to something like dense, because then you might be able to see where these clusters sit. You see, there's your cluster. So there's an empty cluster, there's one, there's one, there's one, and so forth. So I really like this trick as a way of kind of creating these kinds of clusters. Now, how do you control, how big the spaces are compared to the planted areas? Well, you can do that using probability. That probability doesn't just affect the chance of them getting picked, it also affects the size of the cluster, or the percentage of the cluster that's given over to this particular object. So if I pick all the water lilies and then come down and change the probability to maybe 20 or something, then you can see I can change the proportions that are given over to those. Like so. And then of course we can control the probability within this cluster as well. So at the moment, obviously there are way too many flowers. So I need to decide which one of these are flowers first of all, because I haven't named them correctly. That's the flower there. So in order to reduce the number of flowers, all I need to do is to change the probability of that flower only so that it's much less. Then you get a few flowers dropped in there, like so. Okay. So that's working pretty well. Of course, you can still change the distribution pattern if you want to. So we could come back into one of these patches again. Maybe not that one. Something a bit sparser. Go for something like so. So you've got all these different ways of kind of creating this kind of patchy behavior using basically clusters, which is one of my favorite features. The other thing you might want to do is to turn on collisions. I don't use them very often, but in this case you maybe don't want all these leaves overlapping one another. So you could enable collisions and preview them in the viewport if you want to see them. And then you can change the radius maybe just to make sure that they're not too, maybe take this down a little bit. So I can change a kind of global radius there if I want to, just to make sure these leaves aren't completely on top of one another, like so. And you can also come in to individual objects, coming into the geometry rollout, and you can change the collision radius individually for each plant too. So for example, for the flower, I could turn the collision radius way down. You see, just by turning that down, I've brought that flower back. So maybe I'm not too concerned about the flowers having a collision radius tool. They can pop up wherever. So that's basically sort of how I'd go about doing that, and it's just to fiddling a little bit with these settings really. So the important settings here are the probabilities, the collision radiuses, both per object, and also globally, and then in the distribution rollout, clusters and the size of the clusters, which you can play with here. So there's a ton of little settings there that you can use just to get exactly how you want. And but those are the basic settings. So in the example that I originally sent this user, I just played with those settings a little bit more and got it looking a little bit closer to his reference. But those are the ones that I actually used. Right.
We have a bunch of questions.
Excellent. Let's have them.
Yep. The first one is, how do I unlock the X and Y rotation axis of force items in item editor mode? Where the force object has a surface assigned, it seems like I can only rotate items along X and Y if there's no surface.
Right, yeah. So that's interesting. Without trying that, I'm not 100% sure. But when you are using items editor mode, one thing would be aware of is that in the surfaces rollout, right at the bottom here, I don't know if you can see this, there's in non-image modes, which is items editor as well as reference and other things, there is an option there called a link to surface. And if you uncheck that, then those objects are no longer dependent on the surface that's underneath them.
Wait,
so
I'm afraid we're seeing again the other screen of yours with the questions.
You're seeing... yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, gotcha. So I'll just say that again, sorry. In the surfaces rollout here, which I haven't got a surface applied, but just to illustrate, in non-image mode, at the bottom of that rollout, you've got a checkbox which says link to surface. And if you uncheck that, then those objects in items editor mode and others are no longer constrained to that surface. So that gives you a lot more freedom there. And I would suggest just unchecking that and trying that. Otherwise, it will be to do with also direction controls here. Any other questions?
Yep. When will see the edge mode working in Corona render like V-Ray? Like with V-Ray, sorry.
As far as I know, edge mode does work in Corona Engine. I'd like... the only difference between edge mode in Corona and V-Ray is that you need to add a Forest Pack edge map to the original material. That's just a limitation of the engine. We can't get around that. So there's a forest edge map. Just add it to the opacity slot of the materials, and you'd be good to go. If you don't want to do that manually, then you can do it automatically by going into the materials rollout and coming into optimized materials. And when this is set to Corona, then it will add forest edge maps to the materials. It's not only Coronas, this is other renderers too. In fact, there's a checkbox there that says apply forest edge. So once that's applied, it should work as normal. I think there may be a limitation at the moment with newer assets that use the Corona physical material, the new one, that this material optimizer may not recognize those yet. So that's something we need to fix. But it should work on any materials that were created with the legacy version of the material. But if this isn't working, then you'll just need to jump in and add that forest edge map to the opacity slot for the material. And forest edge has another opacity input too. So if you already need opacity for that material, you can still use it. I hope that answers that question. If there's clarification on what else isn't working, then please let us know. But as far as I know, it's working.
Okay, we have another one. Any plans to allow the ability to use more than one spline object in a single array? That's
a RailClone question. It is on our list. It's in our to-do list. We've got a kind of an idea for. It's very sort of early days, and no promises with time or anything, but kind of idea of spline ops nodes basically that can do various things with splines that could combine them and do an assortment of other things. So we're aware of it. And it's on our to-do list, but it's I haven't got a time for that yet. At the moment, the only way is to just connect the splines together, into one object. Still.
By the way,
there is going to. Right? Sorry.
It's a big list, right?
The to-do list is a big list. Yeah. And we have tons and tons of requests. So actually, letting us know which ones you want, either on this forum or on this event or on the forum or whatever, helps us to kind of shuffle the priorities around a little bit too, to know what's valuable to people and what's most in demand. So do make noise if there's something on that list that you would like to see more urgently than others.
Okay. Well, there's a bunch of questions coming at the moment, but we skipped one. Is there an easy way to animate the presets that come with force back?
Right. Interesting. There's not any. Well, if it's like a tree or something like that, then animating a tree, there's not really an easy way to do that, because the structure of the tree needs to be taken into consideration and so on and so forth. And there's certainly not an automated way that Forest Pack can do that for you. There's kind of tricks you can do by adding noise modifiers and so forth, and there are tutorials online for that. In fact, there was a great tutorial by Eloy, I think, that showed 5 or 6 ways to add animation to an existing tree, but none of them were kind of as simple as a button press. They all involved a little bit of work. If you're just talking about adding grass or something like that and just getting some wind animation going through grass that doesn't deform the geometry, then you can do that by adding kind of an animated like noise map, maybe in turbulence mode or something like that, into the transform setting. So if you went to transform, and I'm on screen at the moment, if you went to transform in the rotation setting and added, say, a map to Y rotation and added a map in here that was a kind of animated turbulence, then you would get some swaying, backwards and forwards of the grass, which would probably look pretty good from a distance. It would only in close-up that you'd realise the grass wasn't actually bending. So for grass, yes, there's probably an easy way to add some animation, but for trees and stuff, you need to get in there and sort of start to animate the source geometry, or get the Grow Effects assets and add wind animation using Grow Effects or whatever other tree animator that you use, I'm afraid. Yeah. I'll demonstrate this rotation trick with maps. I'll demonstrate in the next live stream, actually, because that might be handy for people.
Okay, we have another one. How would you create a carpet with custom bitmap patterns?
With which bitmap pattern, sorry?
With custom bitmap pattern.
Oh, with custom bitmap patterns.
Yeah, sorry.
Good question. So that should be very easy to do. I can show you this very quickly. Why not? So carpet, there you go. There's your carpet. There's your strand of carpet. You have to use your imagination. And just going to make sure I'm in a renderer that makes sense. Rightio. Well, some exciting things going on there. Okay, just check this is working. Yeah. So basically you can do this with forest color. So you imagine this is your strand of carpet, this is your carpet itself. I'm going to come in and add a new forest pack object. I'm going to use this populate from selection option. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it basically takes whatever I've got selected and adds it automatically to forest pack. So when I click on this now, it should create a new forest pack which has the strand of carpet, let's imagine, assigned. I'll just come over to the modify panel and I'm just going to come into distribution. Obviously this would be better with proper geometry, but you'll get the idea. Here we go. So what I want to do is obviously change the density. So for carpets and things like that, or any kind of ground cover, generally speaking, I'll I'll use a full map, which you can see here. It's solid white. It gives you the most objects in the distribution and in the most efficient way. So you'd kind of wind it down like that, and then you could always come in and randomize it. I'm sorry, it's not real geometry, but there you go. Scale. There we go. There's our carpet. So how would we create a pattern? We do that in the modify panel, in the material editor, sorry, which I'll just bring over here. So we'll just create a V-Ray material. This works in Corona too, of course. V-Ray material, and in the diffuse input, we'll create a forest color map. And then we can assign that to the source geometry. So the important bit is this tint override setting down here, and this is where you'd put your map. So what you do is turn on override and make sure you change it to get color by map and as texture on surface. And then you'd need your carpet pattern to go into this tint map slot. So I haven't got one, but I'll use a gradient for now. Gradient ramp. Let's use a gradient ramp so we can see it. And I'll pop that into the tint override input and then just change the colors to something. There you go. Like, who wouldn't want a carpet of those colours? It looks lovely. And yeah, that should be pretty much it. Let's just do a quick render and see if it's working. There you go. It's working. So you can see that with a map applied to that input, I can easily put any pattern really onto that carpet. Imagine that was better geometry than just boxes. But that would basically be how I would do it. I hope that answers the question. There is, I think, on our tutorial section, there is a long tutorial for exactly that particular task. So it might be worth having a look at that as well, and include some little carpet samples and so forth. And of course, we've got some presets in the library, the Forest Pack library for carpets. So they've got little built-in, you know, the correct kind of geometry. So you can just get rid of the materials that come with those and assign your own and create your own custom carpets very easily. Just modify the materials a bit. Probably easier place to start. Excellent. Anything else?
Yeah, this is the last question. Can I use RailClone to do a galvanized sheet roof?
A galvanized zinc roof?
Yeah, galvanized roof, yeah.
Galvanized roof. I'd need to see reference. I mean, I don't see why not. I'd need to see reference to that. That might be one to hold on to for the next live stream. Yeah, that sounds like a good question, but not one I could, without seeing reference, that I could just do right away, I don't think. Great.
We have a user having issues with installation with RailClone Forest Pack with Windows 11.
Yeah. That would be one for support, I'm afraid. I haven't tried Windows 11 myself yet, so yeah. I'm not 100%. So
guys, feel free to drop an email to help desk.
Yeah, if it's something like installation or licensing or something, better to contact help desk for those kinds of questions. Happy to handle the other kinds of things here. And what was that? I have trouble getting RailClone to make efficient polygons and keep the numbers of polys in the games industry. Yeah, that's maybe another one I'll answer another time. Yeah. Anything else? I can't read. The text's too small on my little screen to read those, so I need you to feed me them home, I'm afraid. Either that or I'm just too old now. I can't
it would be
see
nice to have more control. For example, have a poly subdivide at every node of the spline and not in between. Well, these are technical comments, I guess.
These are more like feature requests, but they're very helpful to have. Yeah, no, definitely, it's really helpful to hear them. Let's do another sort of pre-prepared one. It's really nice to be able to answer these questions live, though. So thanks for sending them in. Keep them coming, because it's nice to be able to do some of this stuff. This is the point of a live stream, to be interactive. So yeah, if you've got questions you can fire at me, then that's great. Let's have them. This is one that we got on Twitter this week after we sent out the invitation, which was how to do a crazy paving effect on top of a lawn. Something like you can see in this image. Now, of course, the paving itself is not something that's particularly easy to do in either Forest Pack or RailClone, because as you can see, they fit together so neatly. Its simple collision isn't going to handle it. You know, you're always going to get bigger gaps than you want. So it's a case, I think, with this of finding out a way of creating this paving effect and then combining that with some object exclusion in Forest Pack. So that was kind of how I handled that. And let me show you how that works, or how that might work. And I'm going to deviate from Forest Pack very briefly to use another plugin to create the paving itself. So let me find my start file, switch over to screen capture, don't save. So I'm just loading up a file here. Okay, so what I've kind of got here is I've drawn a shape for my paving that I want, just a spline that's been extruded, not excluded, and I've got in the scene, I've got some grass ready, and there's nothing special about this grass. It's just one of the detail presets from the library, and that is one thing to point out. So the library has, you know, these two types of presets, like for example in layered lawns, it's got a detail and a large preset. So the difference is that the detail ones are made of smaller clumps of grass and the large ones are made of big clumps of grass, and it really depends what you want to do with it. So the large ones are obviously, as the name suggests, better at covering really large areas of grass, but for something like this where we're going to want grass to get into all these little nooks and crannies that are going to be here, you're going to want to use a detail preset. Okay, so and you could always mix them, but in this case it's a small enough sample that we don't need to. So I need to somehow turn this into crazy paving, and basically I'm going to use some sort of Voronoi operation. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but kind of a fracturing operation. And there are a few modifiers you can get, but they're not updated to 2022-23, and there are a few scripts you can get. But I thought we might as well use Tyflow because it's the free version is out now, so we can. And this isn't particularly, you know, heavy. So I can fracture this with Tyflow and then use that inside of Forest Pack as an exclude object to exclude the grass. So I'm going to give that a go. So I would come over and add a Tyflow object. This is very easy to use for this particular use case. And I'll open the editor, and then in a second we'll just add this to Forest Pack. So I want to create a birth object. I'm going to pick the object. There it is. And then what I want to do basically is to fracture that. So let's just isolate it so we can see it. So I'm going to hit tab and I'm going to type there it is, Voronoi fracture. And you can see that starting to fracture my object. So you can change the size of it by coming down here, sorry, number of points. So I can change the number of points like so very easily. This variation, and crucially, and this is only in the newer versions of Tyflow, you've got a separation option, and what that does is it pushes the paving apart like so, right? So that's really handy. Another thing you can do as well is somewhere in here there is the ability to filter out bits that get too small. So let me just find that. Somewhere. Oh, enable culling. There we are. Enable culling, and so I can do a minimum volume. And if I turn this up, at some point, see that this little bit that's here. At some point, that disappears, and that just stops me getting these silly little bits of paving that I'm not necessarily going to want. You see, from that one, we can get rid of that. It's not going to get rid of that one anyway. That's fine. And actually what I like to do is to add a couple of Voronoi. So I've got one and then I'll add another one on top of that. There we go. There's another one that fractures it again. Then we can maybe just change the size a little bit. It's a bit too big. There we go. Coming into the second one, I'm going to change the separation size again. Just turn that up. Separation. There it is. Here we go. Turn on culling. Get rid of the little bits. So we get ourselves basically something like this. Okay, so that's sort of what I'm going for. Now, there is a catch here. This, as it stands, won't be read by Forest Pack because this geometry isn't sort of something that Forest Pack can currently read. In fact, I'm going to turn the display off so I don't see it anymore. Because what I want to do is turn this Tyflow stream into something that can be read in the scene as a standard mesh. So I'm going to do that by adding a Tyflow mesher. So I'll just add that, come to modify, change it from blob mesh to input geometry, and then pick Tyflow from the scene. So there we go. Now it looks the same, but basically now this is something that Forest Pack can deal with. So that's pretty much that. The original geometry is still there, which is cool because obviously this is fully parametric, and that's why I'm using this kind of technique, because I can go in at any point and pick this spline and I can change my path around. All right, so this will all be updating live with Forest Pack 2, which is very cool. But for now, we'll just hide it. So we've got our path. Now we could process this in various ways. I'll keep it as it is for now, but I could sort of subdivide it and add a bit of noise to it and so forth to get that a little bit more realistic. But just for the purposes of this demonstration, I'll leave it as it is and move to the Forest Pack section. So I'll come over into Forest Pack and add that. And I'll come over to the Forest Pack modify panel. Go into the areas rollout, and all I need to do is to click on this button here, which adds an object, an exclude object, pick the tie mesh from the scene, and there we go. That's starting to work. So there are a couple of other things I would do. I'd come into the surface area and I would change the boundary checking mode to edge. Actually, it's already on edge because I've played with this before, but as you can see, if it's on point display mode, the grass is coming through the edges of the paving slabs, which won't look great. If I change it to size mode, well, basically they've gone completely because it's going to, anything that touches those paving slabs is going to get removed. So I want edge mode. And if you want to preview edge mode in the viewport, hold down Control and click on edge, and it shows you a more accurate preview in points cloud display mode of how that's going to look. And you can see that's looking pretty good. Another little tip here as well is that in order to improve the accuracy of clipping, you might also want to increase this resolution option here, because basically what's happening to create this culling is that Forest Pack is generating a black and white map from the Z-axis looking down, and it's drawing a black area wherever there's an object and a white area wherever else, and the resolution of that map is set here where it says 512 pixels. So we could double that, for example, and we'd get a more accurate clipping around the edge, and you could double it again if you like, and that will give you a much more accurate kind of clipping. But that's basically how I would go about trying to create some kind of crazy paving on grass type effect, you know, using some kind of object like this. So how you create this paving is, you know, a matter of choice, but I thought a fracturing technique was probably the easiest. And like I say, it's fully parametric, so if I did want to unhide my source geometry again, which is here somewhere, I can easily change it and everything will update, including Forest Pack now. So I can change my paving, and Forest Pack's updating as well. Fully parametric system. And we know it's always good to be fully parametric. And you'll end up, if you render, which I'm not going to try and do, with something similar to this. The only difference in this is that I've just added a tessellate and a noise to the top of these stones just to smooth them out a little bit, and a relax. Yeah, so I hope that answers that question. That was from Twitter, like I say. So please, in future, if you do, feel free to ask questions beforehand on any of our social networks, and we'll pick those up and include them in the stream.
Someone asking if you can create cracked ice with this technique.
Cracked ice? I guess so. I'm not a Tyflow expert, so I would suggest the Tyflow guys for that kind of thing. But this is the free version of Tyflow, and for these kinds of operations, it worked perfectly well for me. But I wouldn't pretend to be an expert in it at all. But I'm sure I've seen lots of Tyflow demos of various cracking animations and that sort of thing. So go and check out their forum.
50 minutes go.
Sorry?
We have 15 minutes left.
Really? Is that all? Any more questions?
Nope.
Okay. So I'm running out of time. Scattering on displacement. Let's have a look at that. I had this question this week, which was how do I scatter displaced geometry in Corona? So that's a question. I think most of the tutorials were in V-Ray of scattering on displaced geometry, so I think that's probably why people aren't sure how it's done in Corona. So let me just quickly demonstrate that. Should be fairly straightforward, hopefully. Corona displacement. Start. So just loading up this file here. And there we go. Oh, hello. Time to answer some more questions while Max crashes and I recover it. Okay. Any questions there, Jaime, that I can answer while Max recovers itself?
No, pretty
Nothing
quiet,
at
actually.
nothing at all. Okay. Well, I'll talk about. So, I think we all know the problem with displacement. Obviously, it produces beautiful surfaces, really, really detailed, but the geometry it creates is entirely at render time, which means it isn't accessible to Forest Pack. So, Forest Pack can't scatter accurately on top of the surface that it generates. And so what we do is kind of cheat it by putting the same displacement map into Forest Pack to tell it to offset the geometry by a set amount. So basically it uses the black and white grayscale of the displacement map just to move the geometry up or down to match the displacement underneath. So it's not reading the surface, it's just sort of faking the effect. And that's how we do it in V-Ray. And in Corona it's exactly the same, actually. So I'm just going to load this up and show you, hopefully, if it behaves itself. Here it comes. Just loading it, sorry. So basically on this surface that's about to come up, I've just got a Megascans texture on there, which is just displacing it. And I've scattered some rocks on it as well. And obviously if you were to render without this effect, then the rocks would just be underneath or flying in the air or something like that. They wouldn't be attached to the surface. Jaime, I feel like I'm on one of those kind of shopping channels where I've got to keep talking and just to keep it going,
A Max presentation without Max crashing wouldn't be a Max presentation.
That's true.
Right. Well, we have another question from Amit regarding the first example we gave. It says, can you show the variation in color of the leaf in this present lily pad example?
Oh yeah, good question. Yes, I'll come back to that one. I will. Okay, so I'm here now, finally. So here I've got, as you can see, the surface is completely flat, and I'm going to forget that one for now. So I've got some rocks on there, and obviously if I was to render this now, if I was to render this now, then the rocks will disappear through that surface. So what we need to do is to access the displacement that's on there, and you can do that using a forest effect. So let me show you how to do that. So there's a forest effect specifically designed to work with corona displacement modifiers, and that is the kind of catch, I guess, is that at the moment you do need to put a corona displacement modifier on top of the surface. I'm aware that in Corona you don't really need to so much because you get the minimum and maximum levels directly in the material itself. So putting this displacement modifier on top isn't as kind of crucial as it is in V-Ray. But the forest pack effect does at the moment need it. Now, I'd be interested to know Corona people's workflows, whether they really use displacement effects, displacement modifiers or not, in which case we should probably change this effect so it's just got some parameters you can enter instead. So what you do is basically add the effect, click on the library, and there's a list of different effects in here, and you can see there's a section for displaced surfaces, and there's follow displaced surface brackets corona, and that's what we want. So we click OK for that. Just load that up. And there it is. And then there's options to the displacement map for the minimum level and the maximum level. So displacement map first of all, let's do that. So the displacement map is the same map that's applied to the surface. So really you want to open your material editor, and I'm pretty sure it's this one down here. But let's just be sure so I don't make any silly mistakes and pick it from the scene. Yeah, there it is, that one. So I'm going to wire that into that text map input slot. So that's the first thing. Now, the minimum maximum level, at the moment, this is what I'm saying, at the moment, this expects you to pick directly the modifier applied to the surface. So we could change this to parameters if that would be easier for you. Please let us know. But at the moment, we pick controller, and then we get a list of all the objects in the scene, and we come into the objects list, and then my surface is plane. I'll go into modified object, and then in here somewhere I should see my displacement modifier, and the parameters I'm looking for are obviously minimum level and maximum level. So I'll pick min level and wire that up, and you can see immediately it's dropped down. Hit max level and pick the maximum from the scene, and then it's gone up. Now if you look at it from the side, you can see it's following some geometry that isn't actually there. And if I was to be brave enough to render this now, the surface when it's displaced would match that pretty well. Another thing I wanted to mention just while I'm on this, because I don't think we have covered this in a tutorial, is there are a couple of other effects here too that are quite useful. So if I was to come back to my forest lister and bring in these plants, then you can see I've got the same effect on these plants, which follows the distribution. But what if we wanted to use some of the surface effects that we're used to say cull these plants by altitude? So maybe we wanted fewer of these plants on the upper areas of this surface than on the lower. How would you do that? Because this isn't real geometry, and those settings in the surfaces rollout aren't actually going to do anything. Well, there is in forest effects a effect for that too. If you come into displaced surfaces again, there's a density by altitude setting, and you can load that up. And then what we've got here is an altitude min and an altitude max. So these are parameters, so we can enter 0.2, minus 0.2, and 0.2. I'm just guessing these. There we go, it seems about right. You see if I adjust this, I'll start to see some culling probably. And then you go into the probability curve and open that up, and what you can see here is that I can basically start to cull the geometry from the top based on a probability curve. So the bottom is on the left hand side and the top is on the right hand side, and using this I've got the same sort of altitude controls as I'd have if I was using real surfaces, which is quite handy. So there's tons of stuff in Forest Effects. They're like little extra features of Forest Pack, and you can create your own. So they're well worth exploring. And that will give you, it sticking pretty well to that displaced surface, which will look, if I was to render it, something like that. Yeah. Good. There was a question about color variation on the lily pads, right?
Yep.
Yep. So let's go back to our lily pads.
And that should be our last one, since we have
Okay.
5 minutes left.
Just opening this up. Okay, so our lily pads. So really the colour variation comes from the forest colour again. So I'll just open up the material editor. I will come into my geometry rollout and pick the material off of there. I think it's already set up. Yeah, it is. So, I mean, if you're creating this from scratch, then this is how you do it. But this is from the library, so it's already set up with various different variations. And you can see basically it's a forest color map, and there are sort of 4 or 5 different tint variations of that lily pad being fed through there, which are being randomized by element up here. Being randomized by element, and you've got probability controls for those too, so they're all roughly the same, actually 25 to 30% chance of them being picked, which makes them pretty much equal. I mean, this probability is already set up. If you wanted to, you could add an additional layer of probability by changing, turning on tint override, and then changing the colors. So we could randomize between a green and, I don't know, a slightly yellower kind of lily pad. So you could randomly pick those and apply that color using a blending mode chosen from here. That would give you even more randomization. Or you could pick colors from randomly, so you could have a kind of picture of some lily pads, and then let forest color randomly sample a pixel from that photograph, and again apply it using a blending mode from there. So that would kind of give you that kind of randomization. I hope that answers that question. But it is already if you're using the lilies from the library, it's already included there. No need to kind of create it yourself. But if you're using lily pads from elsewhere, then the easiest way to add some quick variation is to use the tint override. That saves you from having to go and create multiple maps, just adding some tint variation there, or use get color from map and do it that way. Yeah, so that's hopefully fairly straightforward. Are there any other questions? I had some RailClone questions that I'd promised to answer, but sort of run out of time for them. So maybe we'll hold those till next time, or maybe do them as a tutorial. Have I got time for one more, Jaime? Just a quick one? I'm going to do it anyway. So this was a question this week, and this is a feature that I know a lot of people know about, but I get asked about it again and again, so I think it's worth mentioning. Obviously, trees have an effect on the environment that they're under, so generally they'll kill the grass that's in the shadows under them, and obviously the tree will drop leaves onto the area immediately underneath them. And so it's about how to do that in a way that's parametric, really, so that you don't need to kind of do that manually. So let me just open a quick scene here and show you how that's done. Okay, so I've got a simple scene coming up, which has got a tree and some grass and some leaves in separate forest pack objects. Here it is, and I'm in points cloud display mode. Dare I open the lister? Yes, it's working. Okay, so I've got a tree, and then I've got leaves, and then I've got grass. Okay, so I'm going to start with the grass first of all, and I'll leave the tree there. So the first thing we want to do is to kill the grass underneath the tree. Okay, so in the grass object, I would go to the areas rollout, and what we want to do is to exclude underneath this tree. Now, the nice thing about forest pack is that you can use one forest pack inside another forest pack as an exclude area. So I come into areas, and I click on this button here with a little tree on it. I can use it to exclude that grass from underneath. Okay, like that. Now that's a brutal exclude and not at all natural, and it's also huge. It's the size of a sphere that encompasses the tree. So what we want to do instead is to make it just about the size of the trunk, and you can do that by just changing this scale property here, and you can see I can just wind that in so it just comes back to the trunk. Now there's no exclude at all, so that's not ideal. What we want to do instead is to turn on density, fall off, and increase the exclude area to maybe, I don't know, let's try 5 meters. That looks pretty good. So now what we've done is we've gradually reduced the amount of grass as it approaches the tree. And you can see just about in my original little render here that that's kind of the effect you're getting underneath the tree there. Okay, so that's great, but then we want to fill in that area with leaves. So we can do a similar thing, but there's an option called invert curve that just flips it. So if I add the leaves back in and pick those, okay, so here again I'll add the same tree and it's excluded it. So I'll reduce the scale again, basically to nothing. Let's turn off the grass so we can see what we're doing a bit clearer. So there's my leaves. And now I'm going to come in and turn on density, turn my exclude up to 5 meters, exactly the same settings as before. But here's the magic button. If I come up here ever so slightly, there's invert curve option. And if I click that, it basically switches that round. So now I just get the leaves underneath the tree. You see that? Which is the sort of mirror of what I've done with the grass. So it's filling in the areas that were excluded by the grass. And what I've got now is quite handy, is I've got leaves falling where you'd expect them to. Another thing that's worth mentioning here as well, though, is that these leaves aren't likely to stop just at the edges here. They're likely to be scattered across the lawn a little bit. So if you want to retain a few leaves, well, you can do that by editing the curve just slightly. So if I pop up the density fall off curve, I can just drop the left hand down a little bit, and that will mean that, you see, they never completely finish. I've just got a little smattering of leaves elsewhere still. That just gives you a little bit more believable distribution there. The cool thing about this, of course, is that it's parametric. So okay, I've only got one tree here, but this could be 100 trees, 1,000 trees. And if I edit the position of this tree, then of course everything underneath it is updated as well. Grass and the leaves. Okay. So that, I think that sadly brings us to the end of this month's Q&A. Thanks for the live questions. I really liked answering those. So if you've got more of that sort of thing, please next time come prepared, and or let me know in advance, and we can prepare something that's got a scene file. I've got a few left over that I didn't manage to get through, which I'll hold over until next time. So apologies if you sent in a question I haven't got to it, but we will. I don't know if you've got anything to add, or if there are any last minute questions, Jaime, that I should answer.
Nope, that I can see. So,
okay.
Quite active audience today, by the way.
Great.
So that's great.
Yeah, thanks for that. So, like I said before, Forest Pack with compatibility for 2023 and the latest version of Arnold is currently available now in beta. You can download it from a user panel. Please test it if you are able to, and let us know if you spot anything that shouldn't be there, or let us know if there are things there that you're happy with. Otherwise, and I'll see you in a month's time. I'm not sure what date that is exactly, but it will be the last
26th.
Thursday. 26th?
Yep.
Yep, 26th. And yeah, speak to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.